Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us for the Small Business Briefing brought to you by the Small Business Association of Michigan. I'm Rob Fowler, the CEO of SBAM, and Brian Calley, the president of SBAM, is my co-host. We have a new tradition. We're welcoming new members each week, and this week we're welcoming United Fastener and Supply Company in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Thomas Nagel is the president. They have 11 employees. We'd like to welcome Thomas and his team. And this is brought to you by Marana Group, a data, documents, and distribution solutions company. You can find out more about Marana Group at maranagroup.com. Brian, we have been waiting for it. The guidance from OSHA promised by the Biden administration. I think it's somewhere in my heart of hearts, I hoped that this wouldn't actually happen, that OSHA might find it unnecessary to continue this or to roll it out, but now we have it. And we're going to spend a little time digging into the OSHA. It's called an emergency temporary standard. And maybe just start out, Brian, what does that mean? This is kind of procedurally an interesting way to set a new set of rules.
Just like the state government can do a temporary standard, so if they have a need for a rule, they can do an emergency temporary standard for a period of time. In both the state and the federal government, under their administrative law statutes, or administrative rule statutes, can go up to 6 months. The state can actually extend theirs beyond that, but the federal government can't. So what this does is it gives them the ability to put a rule in place on something that is temporary while they go through the regular permanent rulemaking process. So that's what this is. They can do it and make it take effect very quickly. And in this case, they are promising to file this, this new rule, this emergency temporary standard, tomorrow. And once it's there and in the registry, certain clocks start ticking, but the state government will need to, under their rules, to have a state plan for OSHA, will adopt a standard at least as strict as this one. And they have previously announced that that's what they'll do. They intend to match it exactly. And then January 4th of 2022 is when all of the requirements would go into place. So there is some notice here, 2 months worth of notice, on what that this rule will be in effect when the testing and the mandate requirements and all the things under this rule start affecting operations of business will be on January 4th.
So I don't want to confuse. There's another set of effective dates here. We'll get to that in a second. I'm just going to kind of fire off some questions to you because I feel like there's going to be a lot of employer questions as we go. We've developed a set of Q&As that are already on our website, thanks to you taking the time to dig through this and kind of pull out the answers. Well, let's just start out with who does this apply to?
Yeah, so this, I think, is for a lot of our audience, this is going to be really important to understand this. Does this temporary emergency temporary standard apply to you? Does this rule apply to you in the first place? And so it's, the threshold is 100 employees. And that begs all kinds of questions. Well, how do you calculate 100 employees? What if I have seasonal employees? What if I have part-time employees? What if I have minor employees? You know, who counts? The answer is everybody counts. So what they're saying is, if you have 100 people on your payroll, regardless of the full-time, part-time, you could have 100 people in 100 different locations. But if they're on your payroll, this rule applies to you. So, it's 100 people on your payroll of your company. They didn't say anything about related companies. So if you have a different business that, you say you own 2 businesses, but they're 2 different businesses, then there's nothing that says that you have to combine them together. But if you have the same business with multiple locations, you have to combine them all together. It doesn't matter if you have them in different locations. Even if you have remote workers, those remote workers count toward that 100 employee threshold. What the remote workers have to do is different, but you fall under the rule if you have 100 employees. Now, if you have staffing agency employees, this will only matter for those kind of on the margin. Let's say that, you have some temporary workers from a staffing agency. They fall under their staffing agency employees. They're not your employees. Independent contractors are separate. They would fall under their own, if they have many employees, they would have to comply based on that. They don't count toward your employee count. So 100 employees on your payroll means that you are covered under this rule.
Now, this is kind of like the school count. How many students do you have? Is it a specific date? Is it over a period of time? How do you define that time part of it?
Yeah, so some businesses have fluctuations in the number of employees that they have. So for example, if you have a seasonal business, maybe in farming or hospitality, where you have a season where you're over 100 employees and then you're below 100 employees. So basically what this rule says is that as of tomorrow, when it takes effect, when it gets filed with the Federal Registry, as of that point, if you have 100 employees or more, you're covered under this rule. Even if you go down below 100 after that, you're still covered under the rule. So that's what they say, pick that date. Now, let's say that you have fewer than 100 employees tomorrow, but later on, maybe you hire more for Christmas or something. As soon as you hit that 100 employees, then you're covered under the rule, and you are for the rest of the duration of this rule. So think of it this way. If you're at 100 employees tomorrow, you're covered through the duration of the rule no matter what. If you don't have 100 employees tomorrow, then you're not covered under this rule until such time as you hit that threshold.
So by tomorrow, you mean November the 5th, 2021 is the date on which the count will take place.
That's right. So when this rule, they're saying that they will file this rule in the Federal Registry. As of that point is when it takes effect. And that's when that count is kind of officially determined.
All right. So then let's move on to what counts as vaccinated, and what do you have to have in place by the time this rule goes into effect?
So what they say on this is that fully vaccinated means that with Moderna, you have 2 shots, Pfizer, you have 2 shots, Johnson & Johnson, 1 shot. So they do not have any kind of booster requirement. There's no reference anywhere in there to a requirement to have a booster. And I also didn't, and keep in mind, this was 490 pages long. Okay, so we're going to continue to learn and get more information as this comes out. I didn't see anything about fully vaccinated, meaning a certain number of days after that second shot. It looked to me like it just required the second shot, then you're considered under this rule to be fully vaccinated. But that's something that they could have further FAQs. They could further define that differently in the future. But my current reading of it is that it's second shot means you're fully vaccinated, except for with the Johnson & Johnson, which is just the first shot. And
when does this take effect? In other words, when would an employee have to be vaccinated by?
So it's 60 days, and that means January 4th of 2021 or 2022, sorry, would be that effective date. So at that point, you're either fully vaccinated or you have to submit to weekly testing and mask wearing.
So that got to the next question of the or what. Are there exemptions? Are there ways that an employee could be exempt from this vaccine mandate?
So basically, if an employee decides not to get a vaccine, that employee must get weekly testing. And that weekly testing is such that any employee who is on site, the employer must have a record that employee has a negative test that is within 7 days old. So some people they just work in person all the time. They would have to have literally weekly tests. let's say if remote workers that just come in every once in a while, well, whenever that every once in a while happens, they have to have or produce a negative test within 7 days of that time when they're working in person. And if you're working indoors or traveling in a vehicle with another employee, there are mask wearing requirements. And so for unvaccinated. So vaccinated do not have mask requirements. Unvaccinated would have mask requirements under these workplace rules. There are some exceptions to those masks, to the mask requirements. If you're in a room with that is totally enclosed with a door closed and floor to ceiling, they go all out with this. In that case, you could be indoors without a mask. But if you're in a cubicle, doesn't matter how much space, you could be, my reading of it is you could be 100 feet away from the next employee. But if it's not an enclosed space with a door closed, then you have to wear a mask. And so that's, that part of the rule was actually surprisingly stringent because it went beyond the previous guidance that OSHA had when it was the COVID workplace safety rules.
Now let's talk about employers' responsibility in this. Is there a requirement to give leave to employees to get the test or to get the vaccine?
If an employee is off to get the vaccine, then under this rule, and I think this is kind of legally questionable to use OSHA to require paid leave.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the most easily challengeable part of this rule. But under the rule, it does require employers to give employees up to 4 hours of paid leave time to get the vaccine, but either 1 shot or 2 shots, depending on which one they get. And it must be paid leave. That's what the rule says. The rule does not require paid leave for testing. And it also does not require the employer to cover the cost of the test. So those who are unvaccinated, who are subject to testing, are on their own for getting tested on their own time and paying for the test if it's not freely available somewhere through like a health department or something. And then the employee, those who are getting their vaccinations, it's mandated that they get paid leave up to 4 hours per shot. Now, employers may not, under this rule, again, another area that I think is very challengeable because I just don't think OSHA has the authority to do this, but they're saying that an employer may not deduct those 4 hours from existing paid leave banks. So an employee you might give somebody sick time or vacation time or leave time or whatever. What they're saying is that you may not deduct the COVID leave time from those existing banks. One final thing on leave. They are saying that you must provide paid leave for symptoms after the shot. So sometimes, like when I got my shot, I don't know, about 12 hours later, I kind of had the chills in the middle of the night, and I felt fine by the next day. But some people, for a couple of days, they might feel under the weather. Under this rule, employers would have to provide paid leave to those employees for symptom recovery. The difference is you could deduct that from existing leave banks.
Okay, good. How about does the employer have to retain records on vaccination of their employees, exemptions, et cetera?
Go ahead and invest in new filing cabinets with locks, because yes, there are lots of record requirements with this rule. They require that you maintain proof of the vaccination record. So the vaccination card is an acceptable record under the rule. There is not an obligation to the employer to verify that it's not a fake card. So what the employee gives you is, as the employer, your your job is done, but you have to maintain that record for further inspection for the duration of this rule. As long as this rule is in effect, you have to be able to produce this record if OSHA or MyOSHA ever asks you for it. With those that are doing testing, you must have a copy of the negative test. They can't just show it to you and you record that you saw it. You physically have to have a copy of that test and store it, the copy of that test. I suppose you could store it electronically, but you have to have a copy of the test. And then that the test, the negative test from a healthcare provider, that's pretty straightforward. But how about these over-the-counter tests? And this is where the rule gets a little tricky, because they say, yeah, you can use the over-the-counter test, but it either has to be supervised, the test and the result has to be supervised and reported by a medical professional, or done in the presence of the employer. So as a practical matter, I kind of feel like this rule is saying that over-the-counter tests are not, unless maybe maybe an employer is going to buy some tests and employees can come in and then, take the test in front of them. It starts to get into a place where I think employers are going to be pretty uncomfortable, witnessing or being a part of somebody's testing. There's so many different areas of this that are getting into just brand new territory that, unless you're a healthcare provider, you would have no experience with.
Now, this rule actually goes in a place that surprised me a little bit, and that there's just been this general lack of, I'm going to say, credit for having had COVID, for having natural immunity from having had the disease. This actually gives some credit, some ability to check the box if you've had COVID, but it's within a little bit of, there's some caveats to it.
Yeah, so what the rule says is that an employee who has had COVID is exempt from the testing requirement, not from the mask, but for the testing requirement for up to 90 days. And 90 days from when the negative test is received. But here's the deal. Employers must have proof of the COVID positive test so that they know when the 90-day clock starts ticking. And in that process is in the rule, it was kind of interesting that they went out of their way to say that this is only because the only reason that they're accepting this 90 days from testing is because somebody who has had COVID recently is more likely to have a false positive in tests in the next 90 days. So they're saying just the reliability of the test for that person for the next 90 days is lower. Therefore, they're exempt from the testing. It wasn't to acknowledge that there was natural immunity. And I found this to be kind of interesting, because I think that what they're trying to do is stave off vulnerabilities in future lawsuits with this. And so what they're saying is they didn't want to admit that there's natural immunity, because that would weaken their case for having the mandate in the first place. So what they're saying is, because tests are less reliable, you don't have to have, for that 90-day period, you don't have to have tests in that 90-day period.
Yeah, that's so. Just two more last things. You always kind of want to ask the question, or what? What if an employer doesn't want to comply? What are the consequences?
So this is where it's a little bit tricky. So in 22 states, including Michigan, there is a state department of OSHA. So Michigan has its own OSHA statute, its own state plan for workplace safety. And in those states are generally required under federal law to have standards at least as stringent as the federal standards. There's one place, though, where our state statute diverts from the federal statute, and this is in the form of penalties. So the federal government, back during the Obama administration, increased penalties and then tied them to inflation. So they go up every year. So a federal violation of this rule would carry a maximum fine of, get this, $13,653. And a willful violation, like a willful violation by statute, is 10 times the regular violation. So that would be $136,532. So if you're planning on violating it, don't announce it.
Don't tweet about it.
Don't announce it. Yeah, and but under state statute, under state statute, it's 7,070. So it's always 10 times the regular fine. So remember the workplace safety violations, the max was 7,000. That's still the case here, and I believe that the enforcement agency in Michigan has to operate according to the state statute. So I will be very surprised if the state OSHA goes with the higher fines. I think that they'll stick with what's in the state statute, which is a maximum of 7,000. But if you announce that you're willfully going to violate it, you might see a higher fine than that. But you can rest assured that this will absolutely be challenged in court. I think as soon as tomorrow, when it gets filed, I don't think they can do a lawsuit before it's filed, but once it's filed with the Federal Registry, you'll immediately see state attorneys general around the country and other parties that will file all over the country. I think our Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals will be the one to watch. That's in Cincinnati. And that is likely, I think that is the one that is most likely, based on the makeup of that, the court, the judges in that court, the most likely to put a stay on the effectiveness of this rule.
Right, and that really kind of gets to my final question, which is Texas sort of famously, most recently, passed laws that would ban any kind of mandate on vaccinations, masks, et cetera, that would ban them completely. So now we have a federal law or a federal rule and a state law in conflict. How do you resolve that?
So this rule is very explicit in saying, by the way, employers, this supersedes any state or local prohibition against vaccine mandates. So this was anticipated that would be in there. The fact that they put it in there doesn't make it true. So when I think the reason why the state of Texas went ahead and did the ban on mandates is to put themselves in a position to challenge this rule when it came out. So it has set up this head-to-head, but they put explicitly in the rule, they say, I don't care what your local government or your state government says, you have to comply with the federal rule that supersedes that. And the states will certainly challenge that in court.
All right. Thank you, Brian, for just kind of walking us through that and putting it in plain English. I want to go on to, last Monday, we talked about Build Back Better, the so-called human infrastructure package that's before the Congress. But there's been an election since. And, Virginia went surprisingly Republican for governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and the state legislature. And I think that's got a lot of people, that's, at least changed the landscape. What's your sense of what that does specifically to the Build Back Better and the infrastructure bill? So
the Build Back Better plan, it started out as 3.5 trillion. It was about cut in half, but there were a lot of accounting gimmicks that were being used to essentially implement the $3.5 trillion plan, but call it half that amount. Thankfully, Senator Manchin has been calling them on those accounting gimmicks. So what they do is they say, well, we'll just spend this half of the amount of money, but do it for half of the, just look at an accounting period where they can say, well, we're going to raise the money over 10 years, but we're going to spend the money in 5 years. And so it's just a way to kind of make it look smaller. The way that the Virginia elections went, though, is Virginia and New Jersey have long been predictors or precursors on what's going to happen in the off year or the even year election coming after. And so in 2022, it stands to reason that that Democrats are going to be kind of nervous. Now, how does this affect Build Back Better? The moderate Democrats were already having a hard time swallowing this package. The idea that the electorate is kind of moving away or unhappy with the overall direction. The polling shows that the majority of Americans are not happy with the direction of the country or do not believe it's headed in the right direction. This has made many of them nervous, and so I think it makes reaching a deal that much more difficult. So I would say that the degree of difficulty in passing the framework that the Biden administration put out went up. There's a good chance, I think, that the House still tries to pass something and just get it out of their chamber and plop it on the Senate. But it's really hard to see a wide-scale deal being made in the Senate given the current circumstances. I just think that hill got a lot steeper to climb.
Well, and to be clear, we opposed the Build Back Better plan. We did a call to action on it. We think it's just way, way too much. So the scenario you just played out wouldn't be a bad thing.
Yeah, I think this is here's the thing. I mean, like when parties get elected and take control, a common mistake is they treat it like like there's just mandate to go out and change everything. I think in this last election, one of the messages being sent by the electorate was, hey, we just want things to settle down. Yeah. Like we want things to normalize. We want things to kind of be even. And instead there's been a lot of upheaval. And so I think that's what, I think that's a reality that people are coming to grips with. But what's happening within the party in control happens to be Democrats at the moment. It happens with the Republicans too, is that when you have a lost election, there's a debate. Is it because, did you lose the election because you didn't go far enough, or did you lose the election because you went too far? That debate is happening among the Democrats right now, and it's hard to imagine a scenario where we didn't go far enough argument wins the day.
Yeah. Hey, there was election in Michigan as well on Tuesday. There were a couple of House members elected to the Senate. There were a couple of members of our legislature who won other offices and leaving their current seat open. How does that shake out now going into next year?
Normally there are 110 state representatives. So there were 2 that just got elected in special elections to the Senate. So that's down 2. Unfortunately, there's 1 state representative that died recently of cancer. So so obviously that seat is empty now, and then there was 1 Democrat who was elected to mayor of Dearborn. And so there are 3 Republicans, 1 Democrat that the House is down now. So it goes from 110 to 106. So now what that means is that the math on getting something passed just changes. You have to have a majority of the members elected and serving, no matter how many are attending any given session. A majority of the members elected and serving, that's 54 total votes. There are now 55 Republicans and 51 Democrats, so a pretty slim margin. Republicans normally under normal circumstances, these normal circumstances would have 1 vote to spare. They could lose 1 of their members, and then they would need help from Democrats after that. In this case, though, 1 of the members is subject to a restraining order against another state representative and therefore can't go to session. So now the Speaker of the House of Representatives finds himself in a position where he's only got 54 members total that can attend session, and only 54, and it takes all 54 to pass a bill. So he literally has a margin of error of 0 on getting anything passed unless he gets votes from Democrats. And then not to be outdone, on the Democratic side, they have 51 votes, but 1 of them cannot attend session because he is in jail and will be for some time. So lots of drama there, but it's going to make getting things passed in the House of Representatives harder. Now, when will these seats be filled? Whenever the governor calls a special election. She's showing some signs that since the Republicans are down 3 and the Democrats only down 1, she may very well drag her feet on when she calls those elections.
Yeah. Can't make this stuff up. Can't make it up. Hey, a couple things real quick as we come to an end. The numbers are not looking so good in terms of COVID cases, a little bit of an outbreak. I guess my question is this seasonal? Are we going into that time where just people being indoors, or what do you think?
Definitely some signs that that numbers could be on the rise again. So we see just a kind of a little uptick. They've been going up for 3 months, had a little bit of a reprieve. Then we saw last week a little bit of an uptick. But the number that jumped out on me is the state tracks outbreaks. And last week there were 195 new outbreaks. Those were multiple infections at one location. And that's about a 40% increase from the prior week. So the fact that more outbreaks are happening around the state. Now, most of those are school, childcare, and long-term care facilities. Still not the workplace. Remember, this has been an age-old thing where people say, well, the workplace. It's not, it doesn't tend to be the workplace. It tends to be where people, either you have a lot of people together who are unvaccinated, i.e. younger people, a lot of them couldn't get vaccinated before, and older people that are living in close proximity to each other. But nevertheless, an increase of about 40% in outbreaks in the last week.
All right. As we end, I want to just draw people's attention to each year, we partner with the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, the Small Business Development Centers, the Edward Lowe Foundation, and put on an event called Michigan Celebrates Small Business. And each year at that event, we recognize what we call 50 companies to watch. 17 years worth of 50 companies to watch classes has generated this sort of cohort of very cool companies doing cool things. And I just want to, if you are listening right now and you are one of these companies with 10 to 99 employees, $1 to $50 million in sales, intent and capacity to grow, that's really the kind of the classic definition of second stage. That's what this competition, if you will, is about. I'd like to encourage you to nominate someone or nominate yourself if that describes you. The deadline for nominations is November 22nd. If you get in before November 17th, there is a nominee reception that'll be held in Lansing. And I just want to encourage you, if you know anybody who's been one of the 50 companies to watch, I think they will tell you it's worthwhile to your company. It'll help you in terms of resources and promotion and network and other things. So just want to take a minute to encourage you to nominate someone, nominate yourself if you're eligible. That's all we have for you today. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back here on Monday.
See you on Monday. We'll have updates, and check your inbox. If you're a member of SBAM, you should have received the Q&A and a description of everything and the rules. We will continue to update that as we learn more. See you on Monday.